are widespread, readily available and highly affordable to members of the community and small businesses across those countries. Yet here, yet again, Scott Morrison has left Australians dangerously exposed and right at the back of the queue. Over the course of the last couple of days, yet again, we've seen state governments having to fill a vacuum left by Scott Morrison, who has gone missing in the fight against this critical fourth wave. Rapid tests, apparently, according to the Department of Health, are not part of the government's responsibility. They say Medicare doesn't fund rapid tests, even though Medicare clearly funds the PCR tests that are completely jammed by an absence of this other testing option. Scott Morrison can't continue to pretend this is all someone else's responsibility. How on earth can he not think that this is his job? Joe Biden has just secured 500 million rapid tests for his nation. Boris Johnson has secured tens and tens of millions of rapid tests for his nation. Scott Morrison
Here we go for today's number.
Just when his country needs him to do his job. Labor calls on the Prime Minister to do two things. Firstly, to urgently secure a large national stockpile of rapid tests
Here we go
that
for
can be used by
today's
businesses and members of the Australian community right now. And secondly, stop this ridiculous, never-ending consultation process that the government says it's undertaking about rapid tests, and come clean with working families and with small business about how they are going to access these tests easily and affordably.
Here we go for today's number. It's December 28, 2021. 10 balls. Each ball has a number. Numbers 1 through 10. Swirl the numbers. Pick a number. Today's number is 7.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Global coronavirus cases hit a record high Monday as the Omicron variant continued to spread at an unprecedented pace. Worldwide, countries reported nearly 1.5 million positive coronavirus tests in just 24 hours, with the rate of new infections rising rapidly in Southern Africa, Europe, North America, and elsewhere. France ordered new public health measures Monday, including a requirement people show proof of vaccination to enter restaurants and other public places. But French officials stopped short of a new lockdown and abandoned a push for a workplace vaccine mandate. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said he will not introduce new COVID restrictions in England before the new year, despite a record 114,000 new cases reported Christmas Day. In Argentina, cases spiked to their highest level in 6 months and are increasing rapidly. In South Africa, COVID-19 cases have fallen by 40% in a week after the nation was the first to be hit hard by the Omicron variant. But cases are rising fast in neighboring countries, including Zambia, where only about 6% of the population is fully vaccinated. Israel's opened clinical trials looking into the safety and efficacy of a fourth shot of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine. Israeli heart surgeon Jacob Lavi was the first to receive the jab Monday.
Well, I'm excited to be the first person, apparently in the world, who got the fourth booster of the COVID vaccine. To paraphrase an old saying, it's a small jab in the shoulder, probably a giant step for mankind.
Australia reported nearly 12,000 coronavirus cases Monday, by far its highest daily toll of the pandemic. Officials also reported Australia's first death from the Omicron variant. Here in the United States, the average number of daily coronavirus infections is poised to surpass last winter's record high, with nearly 250,000 new cases being reported each day. At the White House, President Biden met virtually with some of the nation's governors Monday, warning the Omicron surge threatens to bring shortages of hospital beds and ventilators. Biden defended his administration's moves to supply U.S. households with coronavirus test kits, but said more needs to be done.
But it's not enough. It's clearly not enough. If I had known, we would have done harder, quicker if we could have.
The Centers for Disease Control has reduced the recommended isolation time for people with asymptomatic infections to 5 days, down from 10 days. The move comes as the Omicron variant has sickened hundreds of thousands of workers, creating labor shortages in some essential industries. Meanwhile, top White House medical advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci on Monday suggested U.S. airlines should consider a vaccine requirement for all passengers and crew aboard domestic flights.
When you make vaccination a requirement, that's another incentive to get more people vaccinated. If you want to do that with domestic flights, I think that's something that seriously should be considered.
But Dr. Fauci later walked back those remarks, telling CNN he doesn't expect to see a vaccine mandate anytime soon. In Afghanistan, the Taliban has banned long-distance travel for unaccompanied Afghan women, saying they should not be allowed on the road unless they're escorted by a close male relative. The Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice also demanded vehicle owners to refuse rides to women not wearing headscarves. In related news, the Taliban last week dissolved Afghanistan's election commission. The panel supervised polls during the previous U.S. and Western-backed government. A Taliban spokesperson said, quote, "There is no need for these commissions to exist and operate." Iran's entered an eighth and potentially final round of talks in Vienna aimed at restoring the landmark 2015 nuclear agreement, which former President Trump abandoned in 2018. Ahead of the talks, a spokesperson for Iran's foreign ministry said any new nuclear deal, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, would have to guarantee the U.S. will not withdraw again.
We are in Vienna to reach an agreement at the first opportunity, a good agreement that guarantees the interests of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Iranian people under the JCPOA, an agreement where we can be assured that the United States will not mock international rights once again.
Iraq's Supreme Court has ratified the results of October's parliamentary election, which saw the party of Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr win the most seats. The court rejected several appeals by Iran-backed Shia Muslim groups that contested the poll results, clearing the path for the new parliament to soon hold its inaugural session. In 2004, al-Sadr ordered his militia, known as the Mahdi Army, to attack U.S. forces occupying Iraq. In response, then President George W. Bush ordered the military to kill or capture al-Sadr, though the White House later canceled that order. U.S. and Russian officials are scheduled to hold security talks on January 10th amidst mounting tension over the military buildup at the Russia-Ukraine border. A Biden administration spokesperson said Russia and NATO are likely to meet January 12th, and that a broader discussion, including Russia, the U.S., and other European countries, is also set for January 13th. Russia's blamed the escalating tensions over Ukraine on Western powers. Germany's new coalition government has moved to legalize recreational use of marijuana. A deal among the Social Democratic Party, Free Democratic Party, and Greens would see the creation of a regulated market for the adult sale and use of cannabis. The plan also calls for broader drug policy harm reduction programs, like allowing people to test illicit drugs for contaminants without facing criminal penalties. If the deal is approved, Germany will become the world's largest market for marijuana. Among European nations, only Malta currently allows for the recreational use of marijuana. President Biden signed a military budget bill Monday that'll see the Pentagon receive nearly $778 billion during the next fiscal year. It's a record high for a National Defense Authorization Act, surpassing the previous record set under Trump, and $24 billion more than the White House requested from Congress. Public Citizen's Robert Weissman blasted the bill as a reckless misuse of resources, adding, quote, "Why is there more money for the military-industrial complex, providing no additional protection for our national security and arguably diminishing it? At the same time, the U.S. is refusing to spend the $25 billion needed to make enough additional vaccines to vaccinate the world," he asked. A warning to our audience: the following story contains graphic footage and descriptions of police violence. In California, the Los Angeles Police Department's released surveillance and body cam footage of the fatal shooting of 14-year-old Valentina Oriana Peralta last Thursday. The teenager was killed after an LAPD bullet bounced off the floor and into the dressing room where Valentina was trying on dresses with her mother. The footage shows about a dozen police officers entering the clothing store after receiving reports that a man was assaulting customers. Almost immediately after encountering the suspect in an aisle, one of the officers fired 3 rounds from an assault rifle, fatally injuring 24-year-old Daniel Elena Lopez, who was armed only with a bicycle lock. The officer did not make any commands, and Elena Lopez didn't appear to pose a threat to the officer. Valentina Oriana Peralta's death has been ruled a homicide due to a gunshot wound to her chest. The LAPD officer who killed her hasn't been identified and was placed on paid leave. Valentina died in the arms of her mother. Both had come to the U.S. from Chile about 6 months ago to be with Valentina's older sister in Los Angeles. The girl's aunt told the Los Angeles Times, quote, "Valentina was a shy girl in Chile, but everything was turning out well for her in the U.S. My sister does not understand how this tragedy could have happened just when they had managed to reunite the family," the aunt said. And legendary poet, singer, author, and activist Patti Smith has been awarded a key to New York City. Smith's music has inspired countless bands and helped earn her the title of Queen of Punk. Her song, People Have the Power, has become an anthem at protests across the globe. Patti Smith has also been a longtime activist, performing regularly at anti-war rallies and political benefits. She gave an emotional acceptance speech during a ceremony Monday with outgoing New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio.
I kept thinking of what New York City has given to me. I came here in 1967 from a rural area of South Jersey. I had just a few dollars in my pocket, nowhere to stay, no real prospects, but I came here to get a job and to see what I was made of. And I found that the city, with all of its diversities and possibilities, if you're willing to work, if you maintain your enthusiasm, you'll make it.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
I think the resources in Build Back Better, should that prevail, could help 80,000 households. So that's quite a big dent.
I want to come back finally to why so many people are homeless in this country. I know I hear many people saying, well, they think they'll say it's because of mental illness, or they think it's because of substance abuse. But as you suggested earlier, it is more complicated than that.
It really is about affordable housing and wages. I will age myself, but I'll say when I first started working in the late 70s, there really was a housing issue. There was not. Housing, and now we're 7 million units short. And that's the driver. If housing is affordable, people will be housed. They won't be living on the street. It's really, housing's not affordable, but they're homeless.
And so at this holiday season, what would you want Americans to know about homelessness in this country?
Well, I want them not to blame homeless people for their homelessness, to understand that the solution is really not that complicated, and to have compassion for people. It seems to me that in a country as wealthy as ours and as wonderful as ours, we really should not have hundreds of thousands of people living on the street.
Lynn Roman, who is the CEO of the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Thank you very much.
If you are betting against this market, can you bet against these big names? Apple heading for a 5th straight daily gain. The $3 trillion line in the sand very much in view. Let's get to Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta for more. Morning, Kriti.
Well, good morning, John. $3 trillion is certainly the magic number, but to get to that, we're looking at a share price of $182.86. Apple trading around $181 in the pre-market right now. So we are inching closer to that. So for my chart today, John, I decided to look at what happened the last time Apple looked at its drop at $1 trillion in 2018, and then a 20% decline just last fall when it hit that $2 trillion market cap. Of course, we look at this on a logarithmic scale, as Tom Keene would like. The big question here is, does that mean when you hit $3 trillion, you'll see another drop? Because, John, one of the big questions here is that, yes, big tech leads the benchmarks to those record highs. You saw one yesterday. You could be seeing one today as well. It also leaves those corrections. So could this potentially signal a big macro correction that may be in the cards?
I really hope Tom is watching and we're listening today, because we're quoting the Dow. Matt Miller is talking about history. Creedy has a log chart. Creedy, when we talk about the Apple story, though, and what's going on, aside from just the equity price action, over the last 24 hours here in New York City, they've started shutting down.
Well, this is crucial to what you're going to hear in the macro space, specifically because it kind of brings back what you saw in the summer of 2020. Remember, this was before we had the vaccinations, while we were still dealing with lockdowns. A big hit to summer demand, not only disposable income, but that classic driving season was kind of under wraps. And one of the big indicators for the market, where you actively saw the S&P 500 on an index level trade off these headlines, was when Apple decided to kind of close their stores and really kick off those, or I should say shut down those kind of services that they had. The Genius Bar, for example, was shut down specifically in New York, but also across the country. And this is how you saw a lot of that recovery trade first emerge when Apple started reopening their stores, not only in New York, but in LA, Chicago, and Dallas. And that ended up kind of becoming a proxy for this broader reopening. And the reason for that is because Apple is actually kind of a proxy for that luxury demand, for that consumer income, that disposable income that they're willing to spend on luxury products. I know everyone has an iPhone these days, but iPhones at the end of the day are a luxury product. Add that onto the foot traffic you need to get in for their services that Apple provides for, of course, attuning to all of their products, and you kind of have this little macro proxy built into the stock.
It's true. I need to get to the Genius Bar. Ever since the software refresh on my Apple Watch, it runs out of battery in like 10 hours and sleep mode isn't working. Do you know how to... Do you have any...
We'll have to get that fixed. I'll make a call to Tim Cook. We'll see if he can get right on that.
John was making an interesting point yesterday, or talking about the importance of reducing the time that people need to quarantine after testing positive for COVID. It was 10 days. Now the CDC overnight has reduced that down to 5 days. This is bullish for markets, isn't it? Because airlines that were having to cancel flights, or Apple, maybe this is one of the reasons they had to close their stores in New York, aren't going to need that if they can get a deeper bench, more people, and not only for the corporate world, but also for healthcare, right? If you have more first responders able to go to work, that's a good thing.
It is, in theory. The idea and the key word there is if you're asymptomatic, to get that kind of lowered quarantine time, especially because I think CDC officials and health officials, health experts, point to those first days of infection as when you start to see you potentially be more and most contagious. Now, this isn't just about Apple now when it comes to the labor market, but it also comes to things like airlines. We were talking about this yesterday, a lot of those flight crew shortages, pilots. This new kind of step from the CDC could actually make it one step closer to treating the coronavirus like a flu, essentially, in the long term, where if you have a flu, you don't have to quarantine for 5 or 10 days. You just have to deal with it, and then once you feel sick and you're not contagious anymore, you can come back to work. So this would, on that front, be a positive for a lot of corporate America that is dealing with those labor shortages.
The 5 most common symptoms associated with the Omicron variant include runny nose, fatigue, which can be mild or severe, headache, sore throat, as well as sneezing. However, there are other symptoms that are also common with other variants. These include coughing, shortness of breath, fever, muscle aches, as well as loss of smell, although this is less common with the Omicron variant. Omicron is different than other variants because of the mutations, 32 mutations around the spike protein itself, which means that it has changed shape and is better able to enter the cells of the body and replicate faster, replicating 70 times faster than previous variants, and has a higher ability to reinfect. So you're more likely, 3 to 4 times more likely to be reinfected if you've had previous COVID with the Omicron variant. Overall, we also see that based on early data, the reproduction numbers between 3 to 5. The existing vaccines still do help protect against severe symptoms of Omicron, but we are seeing much higher rates of breakthrough infection with just 2 doses, which is why it's very important to get a booster jab as well. With a booster, we see that protection against severe symptoms goes up to 80% compared to the halving effect that we've seen with Pfizer just with 2 doses alone. Risk of hospitalization has decreased with Omicron. However, due to its increased ability to transmit, its very high transmissibility, this means that we have many more people who are affected with Omicron at the same time, and the growth rate is much higher than for any other variants that we have seen before. So because it's spreading much more quickly across the population, many more vulnerable people will all be sick at the same time. So the public health threat remains because it will apply a significant amount of pressure on a healthcare system. So even if Delta had higher rates of hospitalization, it impacted fewer people at the same time. We will see that younger people may have milder symptoms, but those with underlying conditions and the elderly will still be at a greater risk of hospitalization with Omicron and can develop complications. This overall, if we look at the advantage that is given by it being milder, is essentially canceled out by the sheer rate of growth.
The S&P 500 closed slightly lower after hitting a record intraday high on Tuesday as a 4-day rally lost steam in thin trading. The Dow rose, finishing up 0.25%. The S&P 500 only down slightly, and the Nasdaq closed down 0.5%. Systematic Ventures CEO Max Wolf said he expects stocks to continue pushing higher into 2022, but he also
Merry Christmas,
expects
Australia.
more volatility in the new year.
We think it's going to be more of a stock picker's market, and I think the easy money has probably been made here. So we're going to see a lot of volatility as the market goes sideways, because I think the conviction to the upside has gotten thinner, but there's no conviction to the downside. So we're kind of stuck.
Merry
in
Christmas,
I'm not
Australia.
Sure. And then the I'm not sure market, generally speaking, the upside wins unless we see real tightening beyond rhetoric from the Fed.
In company news, Boeing rose 1.5% after Indonesia lifted a ban on its 737 MAX 3 years after the crash of one of the aircraft and the loss of all 189 people on board. Shares of Apple finished down 0.5% after the company announced it was shutting its New York stores due to surging COVID-19 cases driven by the Omicron variant. But investors this week appear to have shrugged off concerns over Omicron, which is responsible for thousands of flight cancellations. Markets remain in the seasonal Santa Claus rally, and CFRA research data shows that the S&P 500 has on average risen 1.3% in the last 5 trading days of the year and first 2 days of the new year since 1969.
Europe is headed into the new year while weathering a serious energy crisis. Electricity prices are up over 900% in countries like Germany year over year, as demand surges while supply continues to decrease. France delayed much-needed maintenance at nuclear power plants at the height of the pandemic, and many plants are now either going offline or are already offline, causing a spike in prices. It's so bad in France right now that the country has resorted to burning fuel oil to produce electricity at rates last seen nearly 2 decades ago, as the exporter of electricity has now turned to importing to do whatever it can to keep the lights on in the City of Lights during the new year. Adding to the perfect storm in energy, generation from wind is down to multi-year lows, while imports of natural gas can't meet the demand, just as Europe and gas exporter Russia face off over the Ukraine. It appears Europe may have to decide between confronting Russia or heat during what's going to shape up to be an exceptionally cold winter. What will they decide? I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Good morning. It's December 28, 2021, and it's a Tuesday. Here in LA, cloudy morning, very still right now, 43 chilly degrees Fahrenheit, around 6 Celsius. Today, working with wood, electrical machines, and coffee. For music, their song Kathy's Clown. This afternoon it'll be going up to 54 degrees Fahrenheit, around 12 Celsius, and it looks like there might be some periods of sunshine, even blue skies. But as the day progresses, it'll become more and more cloudy all along the way. And in the early hours of tomorrow, we're going to start seeing some rain. Everyone, have a great day.
Yeah, I think you got some hot sauce going right now. Staying at home, playing it cool with all this COVID madness spreading like wildfire, y'all. I'm chilling and working on new tunes, as you can hear. Yep. New stuff right now. Not too bad, huh?
I really do believe in first aid. I believe in solid training, and I believe in using that training at every opportunity that you're called upon. This belief comes from a very painful part of my family's history. My daughter was 17 years old. She was driving her car. She had visitors and a friend in the car with her. She was driving up to see Black Mountain Tower and to show the visitors the wonderful sights of Canberra at 9 o'clock at night, and a car came through the lights and collided with her, rolled the car over and ploughed them into a telegraph pole. There were other cars at the scene, and my daughter remembers very clearly the people gathered around, and the words she relayed to me later was that, Mum, they didn't step forward because they said they didn't know what to do.
Yeah, but you're not supposed to.
I wonder now if anybody had those first aid competencies that I'm passionate about. I wonder if anybody there would have stepped forward and perhaps made a difference.
Or perhaps,
I can tell you
tortured someone to death.
that accidents do affect families. It stays with you forever. The message of having first aid as part of your lives is so important and so terribly valuable, as it can change the outcome for so many different accidents and events. It gives me the greatest pleasure in watching people who I've seen come through and say, think I'd like to do first aid. I said, come on down, let's have a look at you. My greatest pleasure is seeing them all come through that, stay in the organisation and step forward, learn first aid. It saves lives. The change that I'd like to bring about is that when you have a driver's licence, you already have that first aid competency, and learning first aid and delivering it at that critical time will hold you in good stead and stay with you for your life.
But the bulk of the saving is actually done for folks in the top part of the income distribution, particularly very high-income households. So those folks, that's then not able to spend. You know, they can't spend. I mean, you can't travel, you can't go to restaurants, you can't go to ball games, you can't go to the movies or concerts. So, you know, you might spend a little bit more on stuff so we can buy a lot of, you know, stuff on my back deck. I've got on my back deck. There's only so much of that you can do, and the rest of it you save. So a lot of it is simply that. And I think for many of those households, those high-income households, they consider that like wealth. You know, it's part of their nest egg. In fact, that may be the other thing that's going on. A lot of baby boomers, folks my age in their 50s and 60s, you know, are now retiring because of the pandemic, you know, pulled forward their retirement. And they felt like they could because of the extra savings that they needed to do.
That's where we leave National Public Radio's All Things Considered for today. An ABC News radio update along shortly. Before we do that, though, the share market having a very good day, and it's gone against the grain. There were falls overnight in the US, but the All Ordinaries here in Australia very strong today, up more than 1% at 7,827. Gold is a bit higher as well, $1,806 US an ounce. The Australian dollar lower against all major currencies, but not by very much. Across Australia, you're listening to ABC News Radio, and it is news time.
Sarah Hall with ABC News. The Prime Minister has called a snap national highly transmissible Omicron COVID variant. The nation's leaders weren't due to meet until next year, but will again gather tomorrow to discuss the highly contagious case numbers across the country and huge queues for PCR tests. They'll also canvass a new definition of close COVID contacts to alleviate pressure on the system. Only considered a close contact if they spent more than 4 hours with an infected person in a household setting.
What would happen in these circumstances if you were a close contact is would be a 7-day quarantine, and you would have lab tests on day 6.
The New South Wales government has urged residents not to line up for a PCR test if they aren't showing any COVID symptoms. It comes as Premier apologised for lengthy testing queues and wait times for test results across the state. Mr Perrottet says the state government is doing everything they can to put downward pressure on testing demand.
We accept the difficulties in the fact that as we move through the next phase of the pandemic, that what we've been saying over the last 2 years in terms of going out and getting tested, and that's what we've encouraged, and that has been incredibly successful. As we move through this next phase, the messaging is changing, and the direction is changing because it needs to.
New South Wales has recorded 11,201 new infections, marking a new record for Australia. Queensland's Chief Health Officer says rapid antigen tests may be used in more situations as the coronavirus pandemic progresses. Queensland has scrapped PCR lab tests for interstate travellers as of Saturday to be replaced by self-administered rapid antigen tests. Dr. John Gerard says contact tracing efforts are also being scaled back across the state, with the focus shifting to isolating those who are sick.
We cannot afford to quarantine the entire population of Queensland. We know that. And this pandemic is progressing. It has always been expected to progress.
An aged care home in Hobart has been sent into lockdown after a staff member tested positive to COVID-19. The details from Selena Ross.
Residents and workers at St Anne's on Davey Street are being tested, and the facility has been closed to visitors in response to the positive case. Was tested for COVID-19 on the 27th of December. The positive result was received the following day. Increased infection prevention and control measures are being implemented, and residents' families are being contacted. The operator of the facility says all staff members wear masks during their shift. Anyone who's at St Anne's between 7am and 2pm on Christmas Day should monitor themselves for symptoms.
The parents of a 14-year-old girl who was accidentally shot dead by a Los Angeles police officer while shopping have demanded justice. Valentina Orellana Peralta was struck by a bullet when the officer opened fire on the suspect who was attacking a woman. The lawyer for Valentina's family, Benjamin Crump, has criticised the police.
We should not have to sacrifice innocent life in the name of safety when it was foreseeable that 2 days before Christmas that there were going to be people in a shopping plaza shopping.
Former U.S. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid has died. He was a Democrat from Nevada who served in the Senate from 1987 to 2017. Senator Chuck Schumer has paid tribute to Mr. Reid, calling him my leader, my mentor, and one of my dearest friends. 48 yachts are yet to cross the finish line in the Sydney to Hobart Ocean Race. More from Laura Beavis.
Monaco-flagged Super Maxi Blackjack claimed line honours about 1:30 this morning in a time of 2 days, 12 hours and 37 minutes. Second place getter Law Connect reached Hobart's Constitution Dock about 4 o'clock, and fellow Super Maxi SHK Scallywag followed half an hour later. The rest of the fleet are still sailing across Bass Strait or down Tasmania's coast, and the next yacht, likely to be Stefan Racing, isn't expected to finish until this evening. There's been another retirement. Wonderland has experienced equipment issues and will make its way to Hobart.
And Australian cricketer David Warner says top players are not guaranteed their spots for upcoming tours, despite the team's success in the Ashes. You're up to date with ABC News.
Good afternoon, Glenn Bartholomew with you this Wednesday, the 29th of December. And on the way, the Prime Minister calls the Snap National Cabinet meeting for tomorrow to deal with the challenges arising from the continued spread of Omicron. Concerns COVID could end delaying Maxwell's sex strategy. Schools facing a shortage of teachers and support staff.
I mean, I'm exhausted. I'm a little crispy around the edges. It's really hard to get out of bed sometimes in the morning.
And they're feeling showers in Sydney. They should be clearing. Maybe a shower still about in Brisbane. Maybe a shower or storm for you in Darwin. It's warmed up again in Perth, already 37 degrees. Well, the nation's leaders will discuss a new definition for COVID-19 close contacts tomorrow as they seek to ease the pressure on health systems and testing facilities right around the nation. Prime Minister Scott Morrison has called the Snap National Cabinet meeting for Thursday to deal with issues arising from this highly transmissible Omicron variant. They'll canvass a new definition of close contacts, where those contacts would only be required to quarantine for 7 days and take a rapid antigen test on day 6. It comes as COVID cases and hospitalisations surge around the country. The number of recorded infections doubled in New South Wales, now over 11,000. While Victoria also saw a big jump to more than 3,700. Professor Nick Talley is the Editor-in-Chief of the Medical Journal of Australia, and he joins me now. Professor, thanks for your time. What do you make of this move to change the definition of a close contact, first of all?
Well, I can understand why the government wants to do this, and clearly, you know, the caseload is leading to huge disruptions in lots of industries, including health and the hospital system, because people have to furlough, have to isolate, and that is enormously disruptive. The problem is, and I understand why they want to do this, the problem is we know very little about Omicron shedding and duration of presence. We really do not know a lot about this at this stage. And so while the government will likely make these changes, whether this will lead to an even greater spike in infections remains somewhat unknown. I suspect it could, and that's the risk that is being run here. The benefits of perhaps less disruption, possibly, versus the possible disadvantage where perhaps we'll see even greater case rises because of the change in policy. Very difficult decision time for government.
We've been talking about the known unknowns, if you like, of Omicron for a while. When do you think we might have a better grip on some of this?
Well, look, every day there's new data arising, but we're still very early in this Omicron part of the pandemic worldwide. It looks as if it's less severe. That's pretty good news. How less severe is unclear. It may be 20% less severe. It may be even as much as 80% less severe. It's probably somewhere in the middle. But whatever, it's still going to lead to huge numbers of cases, and we really do not even know whether, if you're vaccinated, you've got as much protection as we hope you've got in terms of hospitalisation. All sorts of questions still somewhat unclear. It's going to be weeks to months before we're clearer on a lot of issues.
Returning to this search for a consistent definition, do you think a consistent approach from the many states and territories is overdue? Throughout the pandemic, we've seen quite a bit of different advice from states and territories. Has that been damaging in regards to messaging?
I don't think it's been damaging. It's been a little confusing. Some people clearly are concerned about this, understandably. Certainly with interstate travel now occurring, it makes sense to have uniform approaches. And that's probably the most sensible public health way to deal with this going forward. And hopefully the risk-benefit of the changes made will be very carefully considered. I'm sure they will be.
Let's look at this issue of PCR tests and who should and shouldn't be taking them. Queensland's now dropped its requirement for PCR tests to enter the state after all of that pressure. Pathology labs have been at breaking point. These rapid tests will now be used more broadly. Why have governments waited until now? Do they not see these testing issues coming?
Well, I suspect they did. It's hard to believe, because certainly a number of experts have been predicting we would have big surges. I guess previous predictions haven't always come true, and modelling is difficult, but you know, the numbers predicted for the Omicron surge may have been very conservative, actually, looking at the numbers that we're seeing at the moment. So yeah, look, I think government wasn't clear what was going to happen. Probably didn't realise there'd be so much disruption from the caseloads, and of course the hospital system is yet to feel real pressures that may come with the surge accelerated through the year as expected at this moment.
Certainly the numbers in hospitals are on the rise as well. Rapid tests have been available for a while now. Labor, for its part, is demanding a greater federal effort to secure more rapid detection kits for Australia. What do we know about the supplies of such tests? Has the government been brought on
It is an issue of getting tested in the country. The quality of some of them is variable. So that's a TGA issue, and that's a government supply issue. I can't comment on worldwide supplies. I suspect they may well be stretched, but I don't have any data. But regardless, we're going to need lots of rapid antigen tests because one test alone is not that accurate. You need to do sort of serial testing to have increased accuracy, and there's going to be a lot of
It's been saying for some time that we all just need to stop looking at the daily case numbers and focus on hospitalisations. That number in that state now is 625, up by about 70 in one day. They're up to 397 in Victoria, and hospitalisations in South Australia have had a 50% increase since yesterday. At what point do we start to say this is getting ugly?
Well, I think it is ugly now, and it's going to get uglier. I think that's the truth of the matter, looking at the rises we've seen. Even though it's likely Omicron is less severe, less it's also true that 2/3 of people in hospital approximately are unvaccinated, so it's still the unvaccinated that are at the highest risk. Regardless of those facts, it seems likely we're going to see, with huge surges, more hospitalisations. Cases matter because cases turn into hospitalised cases in some close contact or catch COVID yourself.
Just returning to that shift around PCR tests and close contacts, if this plan, as discussed today, was that anyone determined to be a close contact would only be required to quarantine for 7 days and then take a rapid antigen test on day 6. So that seems to be doing away with the need for a PCR test for those people altogether. Is that your reading of it?
That's my reading of it. That means, in fact,
Merry Christmas,
positive
Australia.
positive cases. That means some people will leave isolation, self-isolation, and will still be truly positive, but the test will have missed it. That's the risk. The benefit, of course, is it takes the pressure off pathology labs for PCR tests, and that's a benefit. So it's a risk-benefit equation here, not a very good one, but it is.
The New South Wales Health Minister has been saying everyone in New South Wales will probably get COVID eventually. Have we reached the point where we do need to allow it to move through the community in order for it to become endemic? Other people see that as a bit of a white flag effect.
Well, my view is this. You don't do this until you're absolutely sure that the benefits of doing, letting it go, for example, outweigh the risks. We don't know the answer to that yet, and I think we need to wait until we do before we let things run. The other issue is boosters and vaccinations for those unvaccinated. For children, 5 and up, for example, they need to be vaccinated. Boosters, it's very clear
Merry Christmas,
they need
Australia.
to be rolled out. They are being rolled out, but we need to finish rolling them out. So before I think one would sensibly let it go in inverted commas, we want to be maximally protected and also have strong data that this was a
You believe all the assurances that supply of such vaccines is not an issue. We can do both the children and the booster shots at the same time in the weeks to come.
And that's what the Prime Minister said today, and I'm sure that's true, and it'll be great if we can get the rollouts going as soon as possible and get those vaccines into people's arms.
And on it goes. Professor Talley, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Nick Talley, Editor-in-Chief of the Medical Journal of Australia, and as we say, a National Cabinet meeting now due for tomorrow to discuss a lot of those issues you heard right there. It's 2:15 Eastern Daylight Time, 2:45 South Australian Time. In Queensland, it's now 1:15. In the Northern Territory, 1:45 for you, and in the West, good morning. It's 11:15. To the news headlines, and the Prime Minister has called a snap National Cabinet meeting for tomorrow to discuss the high coronavirus case numbers and huge queues for PCR tests. They'll also canvass a new definition of close COVID contacts to try and alleviate pressure